I wanted to talk about a topic tonight that a lot of my clients and also people in the Conversations Across the Veil group have mentioned um, is really hard and to deal with, and that is the subject of guilt.
Yeah.
So I have a special recipe on how to deal with guilt, move through it, and release it that I wanted to share with everyone tonight. And it's not a perfect formula, but I can tell you that it does help. Being a counselor for over 20 plus years, I've helped many people deal with emotions such as guilt and regret. And so I wanted to share tonight a little bit about what may help you move forward. So when you're talking about guilt, specifically after losing a loved one, it may be something that occurred in the relationship, something you said or didn't say, something that you did or didn't do, and you will hold on to that for fear of just not being able to say, I'm sorry, or please forgive me, because the person that perhaps you did or said something to is no longer alive, and your mind can't conceive of how to resolve that once their physical being is gone. And so I want to talk about this topic tonight because I want to reassure you that it can be resolved. Just because their physical being is not here, it doesn't mean they're not around you. It doesn't mean they can't communicate with you and offer forgiveness or understanding about the given situation. But a lot of people either don't believe that that's possible or don't know how to resolve it if their loved one's passed. So, one of the first things that you have to do for releasing this guilt recipe is first acknowledge or identify why you're feeling guilty. And I like to encourage people to write down what they're feeling guilty about and be very detailed. No one's going to read it but you and your loved one. So be very detailed about why you're feeling guilty, how long you've held on to it, what you did, what you wish you would have done, or what they did, and then your response that may have created the situation of why you feel guilty. It could be something like the last words being said if you got in an argument and you never saw that person again. It could be them having asked you for forgiveness on a certain situation and you holding a grudge or being stubborn and not offering that forgiveness. And so you feel guilty about that. Whatever it is, make sure that you write it down in detail so that you can understand what you feel guilty about, what's imprisoning you, and what you want to let go of. Then I want you to set a date with your loved one to connect with them to discuss what you're struggling with. And that date could be on a Friday night. It could be on a full moon, a new moon. It can be on an anniversary day that you want to um, give the gift of forgiveness to yourself and to your loved one. But create a date and a time where you're not going to be interrupted, where you can have at least 30 minutes, if not 45 minutes, of uninterrupted connection with your loved one. And when you move into that space on that date, I want you to not be distracted. So turn off all your technology. Don't be eating. Don't be petting the dog, because sometimes animals can be distracting when you're trying to connect. Make sure that you're not going to be interrupted by children running in or the doorbell or the phone ringing. And when you connect, you want to get into a really quiet space. You can hold a crystal, you can play some light music, you can light a candle, you can bring a picture of your loved one into the space so that you can focus on them. That's a good thing to do. And once you've written down what you feel guilty about, you'll first want to start off with just asking your loved ones to be present, asking them to show up for the date because you have a very important conversation to have with them. And once you kind of say your opening intention or your prayer and you're calm, ask them to be present and bring their memory into your mind And just be quiet with that for a moment. And once you feel like you've connected with them, you've called them in, you've invited them in, I want you to just have a gentle conversation with them and let them know that you're coming to them to resolve an issue that's just really holding you back, that you've been struggling with. And you can reference your paper of what you wrote down, of what you feel guilty about if you want to, and pretend like they were right in front of you. And just speak from your heart and let it all out. Don't be shy. Don't be embarrassed. Don't hold anything back. Let it all out and just speak your truth and your peace to them. They're listening. They're there. And once you've done that, I want you to ask for forgiveness. Now, this is for you. This is not for them, because in all honesty, they've already forgiven you. Okay, they hold no grudges on the other side. It's you that kind of sits in your own hell or your own torture or torment of that guilt. But the psyche and the mind, it does wonders to actually purge what you're guilty, what you feel guilty for, and to say it out loud and to ask a person or spirit for forgiveness. So this is really for you. Once you have asked for forgiveness, I want you to just sit there in a quiet space and see what you feel, see what you hear, see what you know in your heart. And if nothing happens, but I do think that you will feel their presence, I want you to sprinkle on some secret sauce, and this is what it is. I want you to imagine what they would say to you from a very loving, heart-centered space in reference to your request of forgiveness. I want you to go through your mind what they would say to you if they were absolutely in a space of love for you and everything was going to be okay. And then I want you to listen to what you hear. Because even though you think it's your mind constructing that conversation, it's them. That's how they connect. That's how they share. The difference is that you will overthink it. You will not trust it. You will doubt it. But when you have a desire of what you'd like to hear from them, they'll actually imprint the message into your mind, and that's what you will receive. It's as if they were sitting right in front of you, saying these things to you, but your mind is going to be thinking it's actually you saying those things, but it's not. It's them. And so the next step of the recipe, once you've done that, is to know that it's been done. Know that you've addressed it, you've asked for forgiveness, and you've been given that forgiveness that you need. Now, the next steps of the recipe are a little bit more challenging, and they involve self-forgiveness, compassion, and learning the lesson. So once they've forgiven you, then you have to practice forgiving yourself, because that's where the real challenge is. You've already been forgiven by them, but forgiving yourself is really hard. I always say, you can forgive everybody else, including your pets, but trying to forgive yourself for something, we tend as human race to beat ourselves up for the rest of our life. And that's why the guilt just doesn't go away. It's not because the other person, even in spirit, hasn't forgiven you. It's because you haven't forgiven yourself. And so one of the things that I have found that helps you to forgive yourself is when you can really learn the lesson of what the situation was about. What did you learn out of that situation? Did it change you? Did you rethink how you respond to people or things or situations that caused the guilt? Did you repeat the offense? Did you try to teach someone something that you learned from that lesson? Oh, don't go to bed angry or say anything vicious, because you never know what will happen. So did you learn something that you could share with another from that experience? Because when you have situations and things like that happen, it's to teach you a lesson. And then it's for you to take that lesson and apply it to your life or to help teach others. A lot of times people just sit in the experience and then they suffer from the guilt and they learn the lesson, but they don't grow from it. The lesson is there for you to grow from. And so if you're stuck in guilt and you don't grow from it, then you're going to have to learn that lesson again, unfortunately. So when you look at what happened and you take the lesson from it and you choose to use the knowledge and the wisdom from that lesson, from that experience, and pay it forward in your life or someone else's, then you're actively working that lesson, and there's no room for guilt to survive there. And so another secret sauce is compassion, having compassion for yourself, because this is one of the hardest things to do, is to forgive yourself and release the guilt from something that if you could go back and change, you would. So practicing compassion for yourself is like the biggest spiritual hug you could give yourself. And when you do that, it makes your loved ones so happy. It's the only thing that they can really support you in trying to grow and release you from the struggle of guilt. And so they really encourage you to give yourself compassion in the process of releasing that guilt and forgiving yourself. This is the work that you have to do. So if you sometimes think about, oh my gosh, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I wish I could go back and change things or not have done that, to take it back. Compassion is the way that you can do that. Because when you feel guilty and you keep beating yourself up over and over and over, you're just repeating the situation and the problem. You're not actually focusing on the solution, which is learning the lesson, applying the wisdom, and giving yourself compassion in the process of your forgiveness. So you have to complete the lesson. And completing the lesson means forgiving yourself and having compassion for yourself while you're trying to forgive yourself. So if you get stuck in the guilt, just know that you're only halfway through the lesson. And the only way to release the lesson is to forgive yourself and practice compassion. So when I do readings, this is one of the biggest messages that come through from your loved ones of how to help you release that guilt. So many people ask me, oh my gosh, I've got this guilt and I've just been suffering from it for the rest of my life, and I'll just feel guilty for the rest of my life. And that is not what that experience was for. The experience was for soul development. And the only way to raise to the next level is through forgiveness, through learning the lesson, applying it, and through practicing compassion in the process. And your loved ones come through in readings all the time to remind you of that. But for some reason, the living doesn't believe it. They think it's too hard. They fall short. They don't feel worthy. But if I could stress one thing, one message of what your loved ones try to say to you or try to encourage you to do, is to practice self-forgiveness and to practice compassion in the process of that. So I hope that little story was helpful and you can have a good, strong takeaway. And if you struggle with what I just talked about, if you can't do it on your own, then seek out a professional or a mentor that can help you with that, because it's not an easy thing to forgive yourself, to release that guilt, or to practice self-compassion. We can do it for our pets, for our children, for our loved ones, but doing it for ourselves is the biggest challenge. But hey, that's what we're here for. That's what soul development's about. But we're not taught that in school. We're only reminded of it when you come into people who have experienced it or had to go through it, or when you connect with a counselor who will teach you and encourage you to do that. So I hope that that was helpful. I want to open it up. So if either one of you have a question about what I talked about, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or if you have a question regarding anything else, feel free to ask that as well. So do either one of you have something you'd like to share, or have a question
I
about what I
I
talked
have
about?
something.
Yeah,
It's
go ahead.
funny, and you know Monique, and while you were saying all that, I'm going through my mind, and there's one thing that I just keep never forgiving myself for. And she's like, "Mom, it was no big deal. It was like a 2-minute disagreement, and we made up because we were, we're inseparable. But it was when she was sick, and I remember it was New Year's Eve, and she wanted to go out, and we kind of got upset with each other, and I just never forgave myself for that. We later on talked, and everything was fine, but I still hold that guilt because then she got sick right after that again, and I the whole time you're talking, she's saying, it's already done. Forget about it. It's already. That's why when you say, is it your mind or theirs, or
Right. Well, that's so true. And so let me see if I can explain it. So if you think about when somebody did something to you, and so there's going to be two scenarios. Either you're holding a grudge and you're not forgetting it and you're still
right?
wounded by it, or you've forgiven them and you've moved on. So when that person is struggling with that guilt of what they did to you, if they're coming to you and saying, I feel bad, and you need to repeat and say, you know what, it's water under the bridge. Continue to tell them that, because it will help them and then encourage them to finish the recipe of what I just said, which was self-forgiveness and then having compassion for yourself while you're practicing self-forgiveness. So then you're the mentor for them, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at your friend who wronged you and you're able to give them forgiveness, it's typically unconditional forgiveness, right? Like you're done and you've moved on. So I want you to remember what that feels like, because when you're asking your loved one across the veil for forgiveness and they say, it's done, I've moved on,
Yeah.
they're speaking from truth. And the only way that you can be assured by that or reminded of it is when you think of a time when somebody wronged you, you gave them forgiveness and it was done for you.
Right.
It's not, it works for me, but it doesn't work for you. It's not, you can wrong Monique and she says water under the bridge, but if she wronged you and you said water under the bridge, it doesn't, like, it doesn't mean that she's allowed to give you forgiveness, but you're not allowed to give other people forgiveness when you say that you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you have to be reminded of that, because the mind is so easy to say, well, I would never do that to you. But if it gets done, to yourself, that's where the compassion comes in, practicing compassion, because a lot of times we'll forgive and offer forgiveness to other people. But when we have someone who wants to forgive us or offer forgiveness to us, we don't feel worthy. We just keep punishing ourselves. Many people struggle with guilt, and it can be the simplest of things, things that, we just overlook when our loved ones are alive, like choosing not to text good night, I love you, when normally you do, but you're tired or you were angry or whatever, something as simple as that. And then the next thing you know, they're not alive, and you think, oh my God, I did that 5 weeks ago and I feel so bad. If I just would have told them, then they would know. Well, trust me, they know that you love them and they know that you wish them good night. Maybe not in that moment, but the mind will beat yourself up over and over little things like that, because this is why. I think it's because every moment is precious when your loved one is gone, and your mind goes back and it like rewinds, and it has the memory of an elephant and can remember every little thing that you did wrong or should have done better or should have known. And that's all you can focus on. And it's such a shame, because you just beat yourself up. And that is so not what your loved ones want you to do, nor what they care about. They do not care about anything negative that happened, unless it is to offer you peace of mind and comfort from. It's the only reason why they would bring it up. Typically, the living, when I do a reading, the living is the person who brings it up. The dead, the deceased will never bring up a bad situation that happened to make you feel guilty about or to remember it, unless they did something to you and they come through and they want to offer or ask for forgiveness. So their focus is really on wanting to see you heal and move through the grieving process and move forward. Your process is usually what you did wrong, what you didn't do, the sadness and the struggle that you're dealing with. It's never, oh, hey, remember when we did this? That was so fun. Those kind of readings come typically down the road after you have moved through the grieving process and healed and beat yourself up for God knows how many years. Then once you've moved through that self-forgiveness, then typically you'll schedule a reading that just says, hey, I want to check in. Do they know I got remarried? Do they know, I moved and how I'm doing, or I need some help with this. And so you can see the priorities from those who are still living versus those who are on the other side, and what the real meaning of a connection is. When your loved ones have the opportunity to connect with you, all they want to do is love you, and they want to catch up, they want to help you, they want to think about all the great things. But typically when the living wants to connect, especially in the first, I would say 2 years or so, it's more of a heavier energy, a sadness, a missing, a longing, guilt, regret, anger, abandonment, lostness. So the recipe that they shared with you, which I'll go over it again, is first to acknowledge what you feel guilty about, identify the problem, and then write it down in very good detail. And then set a date so that you can connect with your loved one, to talk with them in spirit about what you feel guilty about, what you need forgiveness for, and then ask them to show up to have that conversation with you and listen to what they have to say. And if you can't hear anything from them, visualize them sitting in front of you and saying what you need to hear, what they would say to you if they were in a loving, heart-centered space to offer healing to you, and go through what they would say to you in your mind, because that's them implanting that message to you. And then know that it's done. It's water under the bridge. It's taken care of. You've been forgiven, because they don't hold any grudges on the other side. You were forgiven before you even set the date with them, but this is really for you to go through the steps of releasing. And then practice self-forgiveness, because this is where the real meat of the problem is that you have trouble forgiving yourself. And make sure that you've learned the lesson in what happened. Change your patterns, change your behaviors. Don't do that or say that again. Teach someone, hey, I learned this lesson. I wished badness on someone that I loved when we got in a fight and they went off and then got in a car accident. And that was the last words I've said to that person. So teach another person about what you learned, because that's the second part of why you're going through this. It's the second part of the problem that you have to move through in order to completely be released from it. And the big thing then is practicing compassion for yourself while you go through all this mind drama, because that's what it is. It's mind drama. So that's a little recap. Guilt is something that we try to deal with in private, because we get embarrassed of, one, being so hard on ourselves, but two, being embarrassed of the action or the words that you may have said in your moment of meltdown, your ugly moment, which we all have, and having to acknowledge that to somebody else, for that somebody else to help you work through it. So we tend
Yeah.
to deal with guilt and shame by ourselves and on our own, which if you can do that, more power to you, but as a woman, we tend to be community based and we need the damn hug that'll help us move through our meltdown, or the conversation of beating it to death, or what do you think? Well, how'd you do it? All the community based experiences, right? So that we don't feel alone. So, if you're trying to deal with it on your own, give it a whirl. And you'll know if you're successful or not. I mean, if you've felt guilty for weeks, for months, for years, then you're not doing too good. And I would encourage you to reach out to community or to a counselor or a mentor or somebody that you trust that you can be completely vulnerable with. I mean, to the point where, you could say like, gosh, I was really angry at so-and-so and I told him to fuck off. And that's the last thing I said to him. That's hard to admit that out loud because that makes you sound like a terrible person. But we've all thought that at some point in some conversation when we've been mad at it. Now, whether or not you said it out loud just depends on if you have the mouth of a sailor. But sometimes even the private thoughts, right? Sometimes having a thought of cheating on your spouse, even though you didn't go through with it, but having that thought and then your spouse dies, you will hold guilt for that because you will feel like, you weren't being completely honest with yourself or with your spouse. So even something as private as that can create guilt and shame. But having somebody that you can share those feelings with, and then practicing the recipe that I talked about tonight will help you move through that guilt. And I'm going to tell you this, it is okay to release that guilt and move forward. You are not here to be imprisoned for the rest of your life by anything you've said or done, especially if you have remorse for it. I mean, remorse means you feel bad. You wish you could take it back. You want to be released from it. You want it fixed. And your loved ones across the veil would give anything for you to know that they've forgiven you or they've released you from it. And they would give anything to help you offer that same forgiveness to yourself. So make sure that if you try to do it on your own, that you're absolutely successful in releasing it. And if you're not, if you're still struggling with that, reach out to somebody you trust that can help have a conversation with you like this and work through it with you so that you can be free from that. Because you weren't sent here to have to feel guilty for an extended period of time. And your loved ones can only release you from that when you schedule a session with a medium like me and they can talk through me to say that. Because mostly you're not going to believe it or you're just going to keep beating yourself up over it. So I hope that was helpful to all of you.
Yes.
Well, I think this was wonderful. I'm so glad that I got to connect with both of you. Thank you, and y'all take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.